If you follow the money, the end of the world has a specific GPS coordinate. It isn't a bunker in South Dakota. It isn't a mountain in Switzerland. It's a sheep farm in the Otago region of New Zealand. For the last decade, Silicon Valley billionaires and hedge fund managers have been quietly buying up massive tracts of land in the South Pacific. They call it Armageddon insurance. The theory is simple. When supply chains snap, when the grid goes dark, or when the missiles fly, New Zealand is the one place on Earth that just might be far enough away to survive. But is that actually true, or is it just a very expensive fantasy? I'm Tom, and today we're going to audit the apocalypse. We're running the numbers on New Zealand against everything from nuclear winter to zombie outbreaks. We're going to find out if this island nation is actually a fortress or if it's just a beautiful trap waiting to close. Before we start mapping out fallout zones, I want to be clear about what we're looking for. A true doomsday haven needs more than just nice scenery. It needs energy independence, food surplus, political stability, and most importantly, it needs a moat, a really big moat. New Zealand seems to check all these boxes on paper, but paper burns. We need to look at the logistics of survival when global trade hits zero. If you enjoy deep dives into disaster logistics and realistic survival theory, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Consider it securing your spot in the bunker before the doors close. We break down a new survival scenario every week, and you don't want to be the one knocking when the air filtration system is already sealed. All right, let's look at the geography, because in real estate and the apocalypse, location is everything. Let's look at the map. New Zealand is geographically isolated in a way that's hard to comprehend until you try to fly there. It's over 200 miles from Australia, its nearest neighbor, across the chaotic Tasman Sea. To the south, nothing but Antarctica. To the east, the vast, empty Pacific. In a military context or during a massive refugee crisis, this is the ultimate defense. An invading army needs a logistics chain, and maintaining a supply line across thousands of miles of open ocean is a nightmare, even for a superpower. If Europe or North America destabilize, there are no land bridges to New Zealand. There are no desperate masses walking across the border. The ocean is the wall that no politician has to build. It's just there, churning and cold. This isolation is the primary reason why tech moguls view it as a sanctuary. It buys you time. While the rest of the world is dealing with the immediate chaos of a collapse, New Zealand effectively has a buffer zone the size of an ocean. However, that same ocean is a double-edged sword. Isolation is safety, but isolation is also starvation if you aren't prepared. New Zealand is a modern, developed economy. It relies heavily on imports for technology, medicine, and refined fuels. If the global shipping lanes stop, New Zealand is instantly cut off from the rest of the species. The country produces a massive surplus of food, so you won't starve calorically, but maintaining a modern standard of living becomes incredibly difficult. Think about pharmaceuticals. Think about spare parts for the renewable energy grid. Think about computer chips. None of that is made locally at scale. So, while the geography protects you from invaders, it also traps you with whatever resources you have on hand the day the ships stop coming. The billionaire preppers know this, which is why they aren't just buying land. They're trying to build self-sustaining ecosystems. But for the average person, that isolation means you're back to the 19th century a lot faster than you might think. Let's shift gears to a threat we're all too familiar with, a global pandemic. In this scenario, New Zealand is arguably the heavyweight champion of the world. We saw a preview of this during COVID-19. Because the country is an island nation with limited ports of entry, they can shut the door tighter and faster than almost anyone else. They have some of the strictest biosecurity laws on Earth, originally designed to protect their agriculture from pests. They treat invasive species with extreme prejudice. When you pivot that infrastructure to fighting a virus, it's incredibly effective. The ability to completely seal the border allows the internal population to potentially eradicate a pathogen and return to normal life, while the rest of the world is still burning. If the Doomsday scenario is a weaponized supervirus or a natural plague with a high mortality rate, being stuck on an island with a government willing to lock the ports is exactly where you want to be. But let's look at the fine print. New Zealand's strategy relies entirely on keeping the bug out. If the bug gets in, the math changes. Pre-pandemic assessments of New Zealand's health security were actually middling. They ranked about 54 out of 100 on the Global Health Security Index before 2020. The issue is surge capacity. There aren't enough ICU beds or specialized medical personnel to handle a massive wave of mass casualties compared to larger nations. It's a small country with a small population. If a biological agent breaches that initial wall, the medical system can be overwhelmed very quickly. Additionally, we go back to the supply chain issue. New Zealand doesn't manufacture vaccines or advanced antivirals at a global scale. They would be at the end of the line for imports. So for a pandemic, New Zealand is a high-risk, high-reward gamble. If the wall holds, you're in paradise. If the wall breaches, you're in a trap with limited hospital beds. Now, let's talk about the big one, nuclear war. This is the scenario that keeps the Cold War generation up at night, and it's making a comeback. In a full-scale nuclear exchange between the major powers, the Northern Hemisphere is effectively a no-go zone. The targets are in the US, Europe, Russia, and China. New Zealand is structurally irrelevant to a nuclear conflict. It has no nuclear weapons. It is a nuclear-free zone by legislation. It has no strategic missile silos or command centers that an enemy needs to wipe out. It's simply not worth the warhead. On top of that, atmospheric modeling suggests that the fallout patterns from a Northern Hemisphere war would largely stay in the north due to global wind patterns. The equator acts as a sort of atmospheric barrier. While radiation would eventually spread, New Zealand would see a fraction of the fallout compared to anywhere else. You'd avoid the blast, the heat, and the worst of the immediate radiation. However, surviving the blast is the easy part. The hard part is the nuclear winter. If enough cities burn, the smoke blocks out the sun, global temperatures drop, and agriculture collapses. This is where New Zealand really shines. A study published in the journal Risk Analysis specifically looked at this. They found that even in a severe nuclear winter scenario, New Zealand is one of the few places that could still produce enough food to feed its population. The combination of proximity to the ocean, which moderates temperature, and the existing agricultural surplus is a lifesaver. New Zealand currently produces enough food for about 40 million people, but only has a population of 5 million. Even if yields drop by 80% due to lack of sunlight, they can still feed everyone. The menu might get boring, lots of dairy and lamb, not much else, but you wouldn't starve. That's a claim very few countries can make. If the bombs drop, the Kiwi diet becomes the most valuable survival asset on the planet. What about the slow-motion apocalypse, climate change, and societal collapse? As the world warms, the equator becomes uninhabitable, and water becomes the new gold. New Zealand is incredibly well positioned here. It's an island nation with significant rainfall and massive aquifers. While Australia dries out and catches fire, New Zealand generally retains water security. The energy grid is another huge plus. It's heavily renewable, relying on hydro, geothermal, and wind. This means if the oil tankers stop arriving, the lights stay on in New Zealand, at least for a while. The South Island, in particular, has a low population density and high resource abundance. It's the type of place where communities can potentially pivot to local resilience relatively easily. The government is stable, corruption is low, and the social contract is strong. These are the soft skills of survival that people forget about. But here's the twist. While New Zealand might be safe from the climate of the future, it's very much in danger from the geology of the present. New Zealand sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire. It's geologically hyperactive. We're talking about massive earthquakes and volcanoes. The city of Auckland is built on top of a volcanic field. The Alpine Fault on the South Island is due for a major rupture. If you're fleeing a climate collapse or a war, you might just be trading one disaster for another. Imagine surviving the collapse of global civilization only to have your refuge destroyed by a magnitude 8 earthquake. It's a very real risk. The native hazards of the land are significant. While the government has good building codes and earthquake readiness, a massive seismic event without international aid coming in, that's a civilization-ending event on a local scale. So you're safe from the heat, but the ground beneath your feet isn't exactly stable. All right, let's get a little speculative. Let's talk about zombies. I know, but stay with me. The zombie scenario is actually a great proxy for any rapid biological collapse or civil unrest. And believe it or not, New Zealand takes this surprisingly seriously. The city of Wellington actually drafted an official zombie outbreak plan, largely as a training exercise, but it exists. The geographic advantages here are obvious. Zombies can't swim across the Tasman Sea. If an outbreak starts in London or New York, New Zealand has a massive time buffer to lock down. Unlike a virus, which can travel invisibly on a plane, a zombie outbreak is loud. You can see it coming. New Zealand could theoretically seal its ports and airports and become a fortress of the living. Furthermore, the rural population is well armed by international standards, lots of hunting rifles, and accustomed to outdoor survival. The number 8 wire mentality of Kiwi ingenuity would go a long way in fortifying farms against the undead. However, there is a major weak point in the Kiwi zombie defense: urbanization. New Zealand isn't just hobbits in holes, it's highly urbanized. Auckland is a choke point. Some simulations suggest that because of Auckland's density and geography, it would be one of the fastest cities to fall if an infection actually started inside the borders. It's a narrow isthmus. There's nowhere to run. If you're trapped in Auckland during a rage virus scenario, you're in trouble. The winning move in a New Zealand zombie scenario is the offshore islands, Great Barrier Island, Stewart Island, places that are isolated from the isolation. If you can get there and you have a fishing rod and a solar panel, you can probably wait out the entire apocalypse while the mainland sorts itself